The European electric bus market is set to reach just under 10,000 units annually by 2025. This equates to approximately 36% of the market. France, Germany, and the UK will be the largest markets, although Germany will lag somewhat behind France and the UK during the early stages of the forecast. Transport for London and RATP in Paris will be the two largest operators of electric buses by 2025. In our analysis, we have separated Alexander Dennis and BYD, despite the fact that Alexander Dennis uses BYD chassis. When aggregated, BYD has the largest market share for both 2017 and 2018. Solaris electric bus business grew in line with the industry and maintained a 14% market share. However, VDL did take the spot for 2018. VDL really had a great year in 2018. It delivered nearly double the number of electric buses that it did in 2017. And this was in part due to a strong domestic demand for electric buses in the Netherlands. Alexander Dennis was spurred on by a strong domestic demand for electric buses in the UK, particularly in London. And they've supplied 75% of the UK's electric buses in the past 2 years. As I mentioned in the previous slide, VDL had a really team, delivering nearly double the number of electric buses that it did in 2018 compared to the year before. Irizar also had a good year, gaining market share along with the inauguration of its new manufacturing facility in Spain with the capacity to produce 1,000 electric buses a year. BYD did see a drop in its market share in 2018. However, it did enter more cities which didn't previously have electric buses than any other OEM. Furthermore, in December, BYD produced its first electric buses in its new manufacturing facility in France. So despite its loss in market share, 2018 was still a good year for BYD. Despite its size, Volvo Buses has yet to reach the same volumes as the likes of VDL, Solaris, and ADL. This is partly to do with geography. A strong domestic demand often leads to a strong domestic manufacturing of electric buses. That being said, based on our forecast results, we are expecting the number of electric buses to be delivered in Sweden to double in 2019 compared to the last year. There's a number of new brands which are set to enter the market in the coming years. Alstom is developing its own electric bus called the Aptis. Interestingly, this is the second train company to get involved in electric buses, following CAF's acquisition of Solaris last year. Alstom has the potential to gain market share in the coming years. Firstly, it has a large capex behind it. Secondly, it's based in Paris, and as I mentioned before, Paris is aggressively looking to electrify its bus fleet. And lastly, it's built a strong connection and relationships with municipalities across Europe through its train and infrastructure business. The TAM Vera was announced recently. It's a Slovenian midi bus, majority owned by a Chinese company called CHTC High Tech Group. The bus won the Warsaw Bus 2018 award for the best premiere at that fair. Mercedes-Benz delivered its first e-Citaro in 2018, while MAN Truck & Bus will be delivering its first electric line buses to Munich Transport Authority. It's planning to produce or begin serial production in 2020. Scania is currently testing its electric citywide bus in Sweden, and it plans to begin serial production in 2021. Now, the incumbent OEMs have displayed an obvious delay in bringing their products to market, allowing smaller companies such as Solaris and VDL to acquire a large market share. With a service and brand equity, however, it's likely that the incumbents will gain significant market share in the coming years once their products have been released. The Chinese city bus market is close to saturation with electric buses, and as a result, Chinese bus OEMs are aggressively looking to diversify into foreign markets to maintain the high growth rates. Yutong is aggressively looking to diversify into the European market. Just last week, it signed a contract with a Danish municipality for 20 electric buses. Yutong does have the potential to gain significant market share in the European markets as it continues to develop its manufacturing base here. Ashok Leyland has heavily invested in its heavy commercial vehicle electrification in India. There is potential for the electrification to migrate to Europe through its Optare brand. However, whether it can compete with the likes of BYD, Yutong, and Daimler is up for debate. The Tata Motor has also been very successful in the Indian electric bus market. winning tenders for 190 electric buses in 2018. With its research facility in the UK, it's possible that we'll introduce a European brand in the coming years. Moving on to charging infrastructure. So the graph on the top left shows the split between different charging infrastructure solutions for cities which had introduced electric buses up to 2017. So these are all the cities which have electric buses as of 2017. The graph on the top right shows the same thing, but including the cities which were installed or which installed electric buses in 2018. And as you can see, the number of cities which use a combination of depot and opportunity charging strategies did decrease, and the number of cities using depot-only charging increased. This is even more noticeable when you look at the cities which implemented electric buses in 2018 alone, so without including the cities prior to 2018. This suggests a clear trend towards depot-only charging as battery technology does improve. Continued monitoring will have to be done to make sure that this trend is an actual trend and not just an anomaly of 2018. The trend can partly be explained by the fact that BYD entered the most new cities in 2018. BYD does favor depot-only charging strategies. By 2025, the electrified intercity bus market will make up 20% of the overall European bus market. The majority of intercity buses will come from hybrid buses. Yutong delivered the first electric intercity bus to Germany and France in 2018. Irizar has been selling its own hybrid intercity bus into the Spanish and French markets. And lastly, just a quick overview of the global market. So the global electrified bus market, which includes hybrid, electric, and fuel cell buses, is set to reach just over 200,000 units delivered annually by 2025. This is approximately 44% of the global market. However, if you ignore all of China's buses, this drops down to just 17% of the global market. And I wanted to end on this slide as it nicely sums up the global electrified bus market. Sorry, this is just for battery electric buses. Just under 90% of the global battery electric market will be delivered to APAC, while EMEA and the Americas will combine to make up 11% of the global demand. 99% of electric buses delivered in 2018 were delivered to China. However, the global demand for electric buses increases. China's share of the market will decrease down to 80%. Sorry. India will be the second largest market. Tenders for just over 2,000 electric buses are set to be floated in the first half of this year alone in India. BYD and Electric Green Tech are the market leaders in India, followed closely by Tata Motors and Ashok Leyland, as I mentioned before. So this concludes the presentation. We do have a Q&A now set up. Please use the Q&A panel at the bottom of the presentation to send in the questions, and we'll be happy to answer them as they are received. There's also a quick poll. We'd really appreciate it if you were able to answer the questions here. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you. So the question here, how do you see fuel cell buses fitting into the ecosystem? So in the short to mid-term, there are a few projects in Europe which aim to increase the scale of uptake. So the Jive 2 project, for example, aims to deliver 152 fuel cell buses in Europe, the majority of which are going to be in Aberdeen and Cologne. The H2 Bus Europe scheme as well is going to be active in the next few years, and that aims to deliver 600 fuel cell buses, 200 of which are going to be sent to Denmark. So in the short to midterm, we don't expect there to be much more volumes than the volumes delivered from these projects. However, towards the end of the forecast, by 2025, we are expecting the price of fuel cells and the price to produce hydrogen to be low enough to start actual market forces picking up the demand. But like I mentioned, it's not going to be greater or much greater than the projects which are set to deliver these buses. Here's another question here. The percentage of buses delivered to APAC seems to be high. Can you explain why it's so much more than Europe and North America? So there's two parts to this question. Firstly, APAC has the largest share of the overall bus market. It accounted for approximately 56% of the global bus sales last year. India alone sells more buses than Europe combined, let alone China, which is the largest market. The second part is that China and India are really aggressively looking to electrify their bus fleets. In the case of China, it sees electric vehicles as the strategic industry, which is looking to become a world leader in. And India, on the other hand, sees electric vehicles as a protection against volatile oil prices and also a means to curb the pollution, which is becoming a national crisis. How do you think electric buses will be funded? So at the moment, they're largely funded by grants, government grants. I mentioned before that in India, a successful approach has been using the OPEX model. So this could be a potential way for the electric buses to be funded. Likewise, battery leasing schemes have been used to reduce the overall cost of electric buses throughout the period of the bus. However, one issue is that a number of municipalities find it difficult to secure funding for long periods of time. So for a lot of towns and cities, they have to purchase the buses upfront. How is the intercompatibility between brands and charging stations addressed? So the European Union has tried to standardize the charging solutions. It's been very successful to do so. There are a few countries which haven't conformed to the norms. Poland's a good example where the interoperability is slightly less good than in other countries, and it can be difficult for foreign competition to enter some of these markets. But for the whole, the approach has been relatively standard. There are sometimes regional differences when you look at the major regions. So if you look at, for example, China and Japan, they use a CHAdeMO charging solution, whereas in the Europe, we use a CCS charging solution. In North America, there tends to be a combination of both. However, you can use adapters to help the interoperability. How many diesel buses were actually sold? I can send you the exact number afterwards. We have a medium and heavy commercial vehicle sales forecast, which gives us the underlying sales volumes for the diesel vehicles, the overall volumes, the majority of which are diesel. So I can send you the value for Europe after this presentation. Here's a question about the clarification. Just to clarify, the European market share label was for deliveries, not orders. So if you look at the number of orders, it was over 1,000 in 2018. It really shows the backlog and how much the industry is growing. Here's a question. What do you think about autonomous electric bus evolution in the near future? This is an interesting question. The autonomy will largely be driven in off-road applications. So for example, in the UK, Stagecoach has launched or will be launching its autonomous bus in the depot system, and this largely avoids costly errors such as buses driving into other buses when parking in the depot. So they're introducing autonomous electric buses, autonomous buses in general, in their depots. If you're talking about the mini shuttle buses, the electric mini shuttle buses, which can shuttle a small number of passengers, then there has been some uptake in countries around Europe, but this will largely be dictated by regulation. My colleague Alistair Hayfield is our local expert on autonomous commercial vehicles, so I'll point him in your way to give you a much more holistic answer. That's all the time we have for today. I'll be sure to make sure I answer all of your questions by email. So I will be sending out answers, and you'll also receive the presentation slides after the presentation as well. And if you have any more questions, then please feel free to email me at rueben.scriven@interactanalysis.com. Thank you very much for joining.